The council chamber of Veyrath Prime floated in orbit above a gas giant called Duron. It had floated there for 600 years. 600 years of meetings, treaties, arguments, and decisions that shaped the known galaxy. 53 species had walked through its glowing doors. 53 species had sat at the great circular table that hummed with soft blue light. 53 species had helped decide the fate of billions of lives spread across thousands of star systems. Humans had been the 54th. That number mattered. It always had. 54 was not a founding number. 54 was not even a respected number in Galactic Council tradition. The Veth, who were the oldest species on the Council, believed that numbers ending in 4 carried bad omens. They had told the humans this on the very first day. Not as a warning. Not as advice. As a reminder of where humans stood. Ambassador Elena Cord remembered that day clearly. She had been 32 years old, fresh out of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, wearing a pressed navy jacket with the silver Earth emblem on her left chest. She had walked into that chamber with her head high and her hands steady. She had shaken hands, or the equivalent of it, with 14 different species in the span of 1 hour. She had smiled until her face hurt. She had been polite. She had been professional. She had been everything Earth's leadership had asked her to be. And the Council had given her a seat at the far end of the table. Not the far end in a symbolic way. The literal far end. The seat that was partially behind a column of pale crystal that held up part of the ceiling. The seat where the translation feed sometimes cut out due to interference from the crystal's mineral composition. The seat that, when Elena had quietly mentioned the interference issue to the Council's administrative office, had been met with a form letter response 3 weeks later saying the issue had been noted and would be reviewed in the next infrastructure cycle. That infrastructure cycle was scheduled for 40 years from now. Elena had fixed the interference herself. She had asked a human engineer named Marcus Webb to come aboard the station quietly and install a small signal booster behind the column. It was no bigger than her thumb. It cost 14 credits. It took Marcus 40 minutes to install. The Council never noticed. Elena never mentioned it. She simply started hearing the translation feed clearly, and she kept her mouth shut about how she had solved the problem. That was year 1. By year 3, she had learned the names of every staff member on Veyrath Prime. Not the ambassadors. The staff. The cleaners, the food preparers, the docking technicians, the communication relay operators. She learned their names, she learned their species customs, she learned what small gestures meant respect and which ones meant dismissal. She brought small gifts when it was appropriate. She asked questions when others would have given speeches. By year 5, she knew more about how the Council actually functioned than most ambassadors who had been there for decades. None of it had mattered. The vote that changed everything happened on a Tuesday. Earth used Tuesday still. Old habits. Old calendar. Old world trying to survive in a universe that had not been built with them in mind. The vote was about the Outer Rim territories, a vast stretch of space that began roughly 40 light-years past the Council's recognized boundary and extended for another 300 light-years beyond that. It was not empty space. It was full of planets, asteroid fields, nebulae, raw materials, and most importantly something the Veth called Caro points, natural gravitational anomalies that, when properly mapped and used, could reduce travel time across deep space by a factor of 12. 12 times faster. That was not a small thing. That was the kind of thing that changed civilizations. Earth had discovered 3 Caro points in the Outer Rim 2 years earlier. A probe mission, underfunded and quietly approved by Earth's space agency, had stumbled onto the first one by accident when the probe's navigation system had glitched and sent it off course. The glitch had turned out to be the best accident in human history. The probe had drifted into the anomaly, survived, sent back data that made Earth scientists lose sleep for 6 straight months, and eventually led to 2 more intentional missions that found 2 more Caro points within the same region. Earth had reported the discovery to the Council. Transparently. Fully. With all the data included. Elena had personally delivered the report. She had stood at the far end of the table, partially behind her column, and presented the findings in a clear and organized manner for 2 hours. The Council had thanked her. Then they had spent 4 months debating what to do about it without inviting Earth to the debate. The vote on Tuesday was the result of those 4 months. The Council voted on a resolution called the Outer Rim Governance Compact. The compact established that all Caro points in the Outer Rim were to be managed collectively by the Council's 9 founding species. Management meant control. Control meant access. Access meant power. Earth was not one of the 9 founding species. Earth was the 54th. The vote passed 31 to 22. Elena had voted no. 21 other non-founding species had voted no with her. It had not been enough. Elena sat in her seat behind the column after the chamber cleared. She sat there for a long time. The soft blue light of the table faded to standby mode. The translation system clicked off. The cleaners came in, she knew all of them by name, and they moved quietly around her, wiping down the table, resetting the chairs, preparing the room for tomorrow's session on agricultural trade rights between the Mulan and the Sorath. A cleaner named Pel, who was a small gray-skinned being with 4 thin arms and large amber eyes, paused beside Elena's chair. "You are still here, Ambassador Cord," Pel said in his own language. Elena understood it. She had learned it 2 years ago. "Still here," Elena agreed. "The vote was unfair," Pel said quietly. He said it the way someone says something true when they know saying it changes nothing. But they say it anyway because truth deserves to be spoken. Elena looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It was." She stood up. She smoothed her jacket. She picked up her notes. She walked out of the chamber, past the glowing doors, down the long corridor that hummed with the station's life support systems, and she went to her quarters. She sat down at her desk. She opened a secure channel to Earth. Director Hanako Mori was waiting on the other end. Hanako ran Earth's Off-World Affairs division. She was 61 years old, had gray hair she kept short, and had the kind of face that had stopped showing surprise a long time ago. She had been working in space diplomacy since before Elena was born. She had seen humanity get passed over, pushed aside, talked down to, and quietly excluded more times than she could count. "The vote passed," Elena said. "I know," Hanako said. "We were watching the feed. They took it. The Caro points. All of them. Our discovery. Our data. Our missions. And they voted to hand management to the Founding Nine and call it collective governance." "I know. What do we do?" Elena asked. There was a pause. Not a long one. Hanako had clearly already been thinking about this. "We do what humans always do," she said. "We figure it out ourselves." "What does that mean exactly?" Elena asked. Hanako leaned forward slightly. "It means you stay at that table, Elena. You stay calm. You stay professional. You keep doing your job. And while you're doing that, back here, we're going to start doing something the Council doesn't know about yet." "What are we going to do?" "We're going to go back to the Outer Rim," Hanako said. "And this time, we're not going to report everything we find." Elena stared at the screen. She understood what that meant. It was not the response she had been trained to give. It was not the diplomatic answer. It was not the answer that played by the rules the Council had written. The rules that had been written before humans even knew the galaxy existed. The rules that had been designed, intentionally or not, to keep the newer species permanently behind. "Okay," Elena said. She closed the channel. She looked out the small porthole window of her quarters. The gas giant Duran glowed orange and gold below the station. It had been turning for billions of years. It would keep turning. It did not care about councils or votes or who sat where at a table. Elena respected that about it. She pulled out a blank document and began to write. Not a report. Not a diplomatic memo. A plan. A real plan. The kind that did not ask permission. The kind that started with what was true and worked forward from there. What was true was this: humans had found the Caro points. Humans had done the work. Humans had shared the data honestly and been rewarded with exclusion. The Council had taken what humanity offered and closed the door. What was also true was this: the Outer Rim was vast. The Council's 9 founding species were old and organized and powerful, but they were also slow. They were slow because power makes you slow. Because when you have always had the advantage, you stop moving with urgency. Humans, Elena wrote at the top of her page, have never had the advantage. She underlined it. Then she kept writing. Back on Earth, in a city called Denver, a man named Sam Reyes was sitting in a coffee shop that had been open since 6 in the morning. Sam was 28 years old. He had a degree in astrophysics that he had paid for himself through 4 years of night school while working days at a shipping logistics company. He had applied to Earth's Space Exploration Division 3 times. He had been rejected 3 times. Not because he was unqualified. His scores were in the top 4% of all applicants. He had been rejected because Earth's Space Exploration Division had a quota system that prioritized candidates from partner nations, and Sam's home region did not have a partner status agreement with the division's governing board. He had applied anyway. 3 times. Because that was what you did. Now he sat with a cold coffee and a rejection letter on his tablet screen, and he was reading it for the 4th time, not because he expected it to say something different, but because he was trying to understand exactly what combination of words they had used to tell him no. His phone buzzed. A message from his older sister, Rosa. She had sent a link to a news article. The headline read, Earth's Outer Rim Discovery Voted into Council Collective Control, Human Contribution Recognized but Governance Rights Not Extended. Sam read the article. He read it slowly. He set down his tablet. He drank the cold coffee. He looked out the window of the coffee shop at the street outside, where people were walking to work, calling friends, living their lives in a world that was trying very hard to catch up to a universe that had never waited for it. He picked up his tablet again. He opened his rejected application. He scrolled to the bottom. There was a note from the review board, a standard note that they sent to everyone who scored above 90% but was still rejected. It said, "Your qualifications are exceptional. We encourage you to reapply in the next cycle or explore alternative pathways within Earth's growing space sector." Alternative pathways. Sam opened a search engine. He typed, "Alternative pathways Earth space sector recruitment." The third result was a posting from something called the Outer Rim Survey Initiative. It was not a glamorous posting. It was not well funded. The logo looked like someone had designed it in 20 minutes. But the job description said, astrophysicists, navigators, engineers and field specialists wanted for long-range survey missions in uncharted territories. No prior council-affiliated experience required. Commitment and curiosity valued above credentials. Sam read it twice. Then he hit apply. He did not know yet that this small, underfunded, quietly determined initiative was the beginning of something the galaxy had never seen before. He did not know that within 3 years, his name would be known in places he had never dreamed of reaching. He did not know that the universe, which had spent 600 years being organized by the same 53 species sitting at the same table making the same decisions, was about to be interrupted. He just knew that it was the first posting he had ever read that did not ask him where he was from. He hit send. The application disappeared into whatever system received it. Sam finished his cold coffee. He stood up. He put on his jacket. He walked out into the morning and the city moved around him, and the sky above was blue and clear, and somewhere beyond that sky 40 light years past a boundary drawn by people who had never asked humanity's opinion, the Outer Rim waited. It had been waiting a long time. The Outer Rim Survey Initiative had an office. Calling it an office was generous. It was 3 connected rooms on the 14th floor of a building in Houston that mostly housed accounting firms and a dental practice. The carpets were gray and slightly fraying at the edges. The windows looked out over a highway. There were 12 desks, 9 of which were occupied. On one wall, someone had pinned a printed star map of the Outer Rim and drawn on it in red marker, routes, points of interest, question marks next to anomalies that had not yet been explained. The person who had drawn on the map was Dr. Yara Singh. She was 44 years old, had a doctorate in deep space cartography, and had spent the last 11 years working for a private space survey company that had gone bankrupt 8 months ago. When the company folded, Yara had taken the company's entire data archive. Legally, her contract had given her rights to any intellectual property she had directly contributed to, and she had walked out with 17 hard drives in a backpack and started the Outer Rim Survey Initiative from her apartment dining table. The initiative was not government-funded. It was not council-affiliated. It was funded by a combination of small grants from 3 universities, a modest investment from a tech entrepreneur named Carl Nguyen who had made his money in deep space satellite communications and believed firmly that Earth was being systematically underestimated, and the personal savings of Yara herself, which were not as modest as she let on because she had been quietly investing in asteroid mining futures for 6 years. When Sam Reyes walked through the door of the initiative's Houston office on a Thursday morning in early spring, Yara was standing at the star map with a red marker in her hand. "You're the astrophysics applicant from Denver," she said without turning around. "Yes," Sam said. "Sam Reyes. Your application said you've been tracking anomalous gravitational readings in the Outer Rim as a personal project." "Since I was 23, Sam said. "I built a receiver array on my roof. It's not professional grade, but the data is consistent." Yara turned around. She looked at him for a moment. She had dark eyes that moved quickly, like they were always processing more information than most people would notice. "Show me," she said. Sam pulled out his tablet. He had his data on it, 5 years of readings, organized into a system he had built himself, cross-referenced with publicly available council survey data and the limited Outer Rim reports that Earth's Space Agency had released before the council vote had effectively frozen human access to official information channels. Yara took the tablet. She scrolled. She zoomed in on one section. She looked up at the star map. She looked back at the tablet. She made a small sound, not quite a word, more like a confirmation of something she had already been thinking. "You found a pattern," she said. 3 years ago, Sam said. "The Caro points that Earth's probe discovered, they're not random. They follow a curve. A predictable arc. If the arc holds, there are at least 9 more points in the Outer Rim that haven't been publicly cataloged." Yara handed him back the tablet. 11, she said. Sam blinked. 11? "We've been running the same calculation from the other direction. You found it from gravitational data. We found it from electromagnetic resonance patterns. Different methods, same result. 11 more Caro points." She paused. "The council knows about 3. We believe they know about 2 more that they haven't disclosed publicly. They're hiding them?" Sam asked. Bureaucracies don't hide things, Yara said. They delay things. They classify things. They put things in review cycles that take 40 years. She almost smiled. But the result looks the same from the outside. She pulled out a chair from one of the empty desks. Sit down, she said. We have a lot to talk about. Sam had been working at the initiative for 3 weeks when he met the rest of the core team. There was Marcus Webb, the engineer Elena Cord had quietly used to fix her translation feed on Verath Prime. Marcus had left the Council station after 5 years of contract work and come back to Earth with a deep understanding of Council technology, Council infrastructure and, most importantly, Council blind spots. He was 41, broad-shouldered, spoke in short sentences, and had the habit of solving problems before other people had finished explaining them. There was Dr. Priya Anand, a xenobiologist who had spent 8 years on a Council-approved research vessel studying life on non-human planets. She had left the vessel after her research team's findings, evidence that 3 outer rim planets had the conditions to support complex ecosystems, had been classified by the Council's Science Board under a directive that restricted publication of data that could motivate unsanctioned expansion activities. Priya had memorized her research before turning in her hard drives. She had written it all down again from memory in a rented room in Mumbai and submitted it to 3 independent scientific journals under a pseudonym. There was Lieutenant Commander, retired, James Okafor, who had served in Earth's Joint Defense Partnership with the Council for 12 years and had quietly been building a mental map of the Council military's blind spots, patrol routes and response times in the Outer Rim region for the last 4 of those years. He was not paranoid. He was prepared. There was a difference. And there was Lena Park, who was 26, had no advanced degrees, and had grown up in a family that ran a commercial fishing operation off the coast of South Korea. Lena had taught herself FTL navigation mechanics at 17 by reverse engineering the open-source code from a Council navigation system that had been improperly left in a public archive for 11 days before it was taken down. She had downloaded it on day 3. She was the best navigator on the team by a significant margin, and she was the one who had first identified the specific entry corridors that would allow a small ship to reach the Outer Rim through routes the Council did not actively monitor. These were the people who were going to do what the Council had never expected anyone to do. Not because they were heroes. Not because they had been chosen or trained or destined. But because they were humans who had been told no enough times that the word had stopped working on them. The meeting that changed everything happened on a Wednesday night. Yara had ordered food, rice and lentils from a place across the street that stayed open until midnight. Everyone was around the table. The star map was on the wall. The red marker lines had gotten more detailed over the 3 weeks since Sam had joined. We need a ship, Yara said. It was not a new statement. It was a returning statement. It always came back to this. Carl is willing to fund a refit of the Meridian, Marcus said. The Meridian was a mid-range survey vessel that Carl and Gwyn had purchased 3 years ago and had been sitting in a private hangar outside of Houston. It was not a new ship. It had been built 15 years ago as a commercial deep space freighter and retrofitted once for survey work. But it was solid. Marcus had inspected it personally. I can make it work, he said. How long? Yara asked. 8 weeks if I have the right people. You have the right people, Priya said. We literally have a xenobiologist, an astrophysicist, and a navigation genius sitting at this table. What else do you need? 3 more engineers, 2 more pilots, and someone who knows how to calibrate a deep space resonance array, Marcus said. I can calibrate the resonance array, Sam said. Everyone looked at him. My roof setup was basically a miniature version, he said. I know the principles. Give me the components and enough time to read the manual for the actual professional grade system and I can do it. Marcus studied him for a moment. Okay, he said. You can do it. 8 weeks was optimistic. It took 11. But on a cool October morning, the Meridian sat in its hangar fully refitted, fueled, and ready. It was not a beautiful ship. It was dark gray and functional with an asymmetrical sensor array on its left side that Marcus had built from components sourced from 4 different manufacturers because the Council standard parts were restricted for non-affiliated vessels. But it worked. Everything on it worked. Marcus had tested every system 3 times. Yara stood in front of it in the hangar. The team stood with her. 8 people total. 6 humans who had come aboard after a careful vetting process, plus the core 5. I want to be clear about what we're doing, Yara said. She was not giving a motivational speech. She was being factual, which was what she always was. We are going into the Outer Rim to conduct independent survey work in unclaimed space. The Council's Outer Rim Governance Compact applies to management of discovered Caro points, but it does not legally prohibit independent survey work in uncharted territories. We are not violating any treaty. We are not declaring war. We are going to look at what is out there and we are going to bring back data. And if we find more Caro points? James asked. Then we document them, Yara said. And we decide as a team what we do with that information. The council won't like it, Priya said. The council doesn't have to like it, Yara said simply. They just have to deal with it. There was a moment of silence in the hangar. The kind of silence that comes not from emptiness but from everyone thinking the same thing at the same time and not needing to say it out loud. Then Marcus walked up the loading ramp. Then Lena. Then Sam. Then the others. Yara was last. She looked back at the hangar, the concrete floor, the fluorescent lights, the parking lot visible through the open hangar doors where the Houston morning was beginning. She thought about everything that had brought her here. The company that went bankrupt. The 17 hard drives in her backpack. The apartment dining table where she had started this whole thing with nothing but data and a refusal to stop. She turned around and walked up the ramp. The ramp closed behind her. The meridian lifted. And humans went back to the outer rim. The first 3 days of travel were quiet. The meridian moved through council-monitored space without incident. Lena flew it with the casual efficiency of someone who had spent years imagining exactly this moment. She sat in the navigation chair with one leg tucked under her and a cold drink in the holder beside her, and she flew like she was born to it. Sam spent the first 3 days in the sensor bay. The resonance array he had calibrated was running beautifully. He had been nervous about it. The professional-grade system was significantly more complex than his roof setup, but the principles were the same and his calibration was clean. The array was picking up data in a radius that would have taken Earth's official probe missions 6 months to collect. On day 4, they crossed the Council's recognized boundary. There was no physical marker. No gate, no sign, no wall. Just a coordinate line in the navigation system that Lena had marked in yellow, and when they crossed it she said quietly, "We're outside." Outside. It was a strange word for space. But everyone on the ship understood exactly what she meant. The outer rim began. It was not dark exactly. Space is never truly dark when you know how to look at it. What it was different. The density of star systems changed. The background radiation had a slightly different signature. The gravitational currents, which experienced navigators could feel through the behavior of a ship the way a sailor feels ocean currents, ran in longer, slower patterns. It felt old out here. Not dead. Like a part of the galaxy that had been turning for a very long time without being interrupted. Priya stood at the observation window for 2 full hours on the first day in the outer rim. She had a notebook, actual paper, and she was writing in it. Not data. Notes. The kind of notes a scientist writes when the data hasn't started yet and what they're recording is just the feeling of being somewhere new. "It's beautiful," she said to Sam when he came to stand beside her. "It's huge," Sam said. "Both," Priya agreed. On day 7 Sam found the first Caro point. He almost missed it. The resonance array flagged it as a minor anomaly at first. The kind of reading that could be dismissed as instrument noise or local gravitational interference from a nearby brown dwarf. But Sam had 5 years of his own data in his head and something about the pattern felt familiar. He ran it through his analysis system twice. Then he ran it through a third time with a different parameter set. It was not instrument noise. It was a Caro point. And it was significantly larger than the 3 that Earth's probe had originally discovered. "Yara," he said. She was at his side within 30 seconds. She looked at the data on his screen. She looked at it for a long time. "How strong?" she asked. "Transit capacity at this size would be," Sam calculated, "about 40 ships simultaneously. Maybe more. It's not just a shortcut, it's a highway." Yara straightened up. She looked at the star map on the sensor bay wall. They had brought the Houston map on board, reprinted larger. She looked at where they were. She looked at the arc she and Sam had calculated. She made that small sound again, the confirmation sound. "Mark it," she said. Sam marked it. "Don't broadcast it," she said. Sam nodded. He understood. Broadcasting meant council sensors might pick it up. They were not ready for that yet. He marked it in their private data system, encrypted under a 3-layer code that Marcus had designed and that Lena was the only other person on ship who knew how to access. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at the data and thought about what it meant. 1 Caro point. Larger than any previously catalogued. Already changing the math. And they had been in the outer rim for 7 days. The arc calculation suggested 10 more. Back on Veyrath Prime, Elena Cord was having a very difficult week. The council had moved quickly after the vote. The 9 founding species had dispatched a joint survey fleet into the outer rim, 12 ships heavily equipped, with the full resources of the council's survey and exploration division behind them. They were following Earth's original data, the data Elena had presented transparently 2 years ago, and they were using it to find and map the Caro points that the Compact had handed them governance rights over. Elena sat in her sessions and watched the reports come in. The joint fleet had found one of the original 3 Caro points and was in the process of installing initial monitoring infrastructure. The founding nine were moving with unusual speed, unusual for them anyway. Normally council operations moved like tectonic plates. This time there was a sense of urgency that Elena found interesting. She mentioned it to her assistant, a young man named Daniel Park, no relation to Lena, who had joined the Earth diplomatic team 6 months ago fresh from a policy program at a university in Toronto. Daniel was 24, very organized, and had a gift for noticing patterns and information. Why the urgency? Elena asked him. They were sitting in her quarters, going over the week's session notes. Daniel looked up from his tablet. I've been thinking about that, he said. The founding nine don't usually move this fast. Last time there was a major territorial development, the response took 8 months. What's different this time? I think they're worried about something, Daniel said. Something they're not saying out loud in sessions. Like what? Daniel turned his tablet toward Elena. He had pulled up a council internal communications summary, not classified, but dense enough that most people didn't read it carefully. There's a reference here, buried in a logistics subreport, to something called an unauthorized survey signature, detected near the outer rim boundary 6 days ago. Elena's face did not change. She had trained herself for that. But inside something shifted. Unauthorized, she repeated. The report doesn't say human, Daniel said. It just says unauthorized, which in council language means non-affiliated. Non-affiliated, Elena said. There are only a handful of non-affiliated species with survey capabilities anywhere near the outer rim, Daniel said. Most of them are too small or too remote to mount an operation that would show up on council sensors. Elena said nothing for a moment. She thought about Hanako Mori. She thought about the conversation they had after the vote. We're going to go back to the outer rim. Keep watching that sub-report, Elena said. And don't mention it to anyone else on the team for now. Okay, Daniel said. He paused. Is there something I should know? Elena looked at him. Not yet, she said. But possibly soon. On the Meridian, Day 9 brought something none of them had expected. They found a planet. Not just a planet with an atmosphere. With liquid water. With a specific chemical signature in the upper atmosphere that Priya recognized immediately. She ran every test she had. She ran them twice. She stood in the sensor bay for 4 hours straight without sitting down or eating, just running tests and writing notes on her paper notebook. Then she came to find Yara. It's breathable, she said. Yara turned from her desk. Define breathable. Oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere. 73% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, trace gases at acceptable levels. Surface temperature range consistent with liquid water. Gravity at 94% Earth standard. Priya's hands were not entirely steady. She pressed them flat against the table. It's not just habitable. It's comfortable. The word fell into the room like a stone into water. Circles spreading out from the point of impact. Comfortable. In a galaxy where habitable worlds were not rare but comfortable ones where humans could walk outside without equipment, breathe without suits, stand under a sun and feel it the way they felt the sun at home, those were rare. Those were the kind of rare that changed everything. Does the council know about it? Yara asked. I cross-referenced it against all publicly available council survey records, Priya said. It doesn't appear anywhere. Not even as a cataloged but unexplored location. So they don't know. Not as far as I can determine. Yara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, how far are we from it? 3 days at current speed. I can get us there faster if we push the engines a bit. Don't push the engines. 3 days is fine. Yara paused. We go look at it. And then we decide, Yara said. Which was what she always said. Which was the right thing to say because deciding without seeing was a mistake that large organizations made. The Meridian was not a large organization. The Meridian was 8 people and a refitted freighter and a red marker star map, and they could afford to look before they decided. But when they actually stood above that planet 3 days later and looked at it through the observation window, blue and green and white clouded and turning slowly in the dark, when they looked at it, the decision was not really a decision at all. It was an understanding. This place was real. This place was possible. And humans had found it. The report that arrived on Elena Cord's desk on a Friday morning was not addressed to her. It was addressed to the full Council Diplomatic Corps, which meant it went to every ambassador simultaneously. This was unusual. The Council's communications hierarchy was rigid and layered. Information typically moved through specific channels to specific recipients. When something went to everyone at once, it meant something had happened that the Council leadership wanted all parties to know about immediately, not because they valued transparency, but because the information was going to be impossible to contain and they preferred to control the framing. Elena read the report. Then she read it again. An unauthorized survey vessel had been detected operating in the outer rim. The vessel's transponder signal had been masked, deliberately, the report noted, which indicated sophisticated navigation technology, but Council sensor arrays had caught an emission signature during a resonance scan. The signature had been analyzed. The analysis was, the report said, consistent with human origin technology. The report went on to describe this as a violation of the spirit of the Outer Rim Governance Compact. It noted that while the compact did not explicitly prohibit independent survey work in unclaimed space, conducting such work without Council notification was inconsistent with cooperative governance principles. It called for an emergency session to discuss the matter. The emergency session was scheduled for Monday. Elena set down the report. She looked out her porthole at Duran turning below. She thought about Yara Singh. She had been briefed on the Outer Rim Survey Initiative. Hanako had told her about it, quietly, in a secure channel call 4 months ago. She knew the Meridian was out there. She had known and had said nothing, which was a choice she had made with open eyes and had spent exactly 0 minutes feeling guilty about. She opened a channel to Hanako. They know there's a human ship in the Outer Rim, Elena said. How much do they know? Hanako asked. Emission signature. They don't have a location, they don't have a name, they don't have anything specific. But they've called an emergency session for Monday. What will they do? They'll pass a resolution, Elena said. They always pass a resolution. The question is what the resolution says. What do you think it will say? Elena thought about it. She thought about the 9 founding species and their priorities and their fears. Fear was underrated as a driver of Council decisions. People assumed the Council operated on principle and precedent. In Elena's experience, it operated on precedent and anxiety, which was different. They'll try to extend the compact's scope, she said. Try to make it explicitly prohibit unauthorized survey activity. They'll frame it as protecting the integrity of governance structures. Can they do that? With 31 votes, yes. Do they have 31 votes? They have 31 votes for anything they really want, Elena said. The founding 9 collectively held 9 votes and had treaty agreements with enough of the remaining species to reliably swing the count when it mattered. So the ship gets locked out. Effectively. If the resolution passes, any survey data collected by unauthorized vessels in the Outer Rim becomes legally contested. The Council could argue it belongs to the collective governance framework. They could tie it up in administrative process for decades. Hanako was quiet for a moment. Monday, she said. Monday, Elena confirmed. We need to know what Yara's team has found before Monday, Hanako said. I know. Can you reach them? Not through official channels. The Meridian doesn't have Council-band communication, by design. Can you reach them at all? Elena thought for a moment. She thought about Marcus Webb, who had worked on Veyrath Prime for 5 years and knew its communication systems better than anyone on the Council staff. She thought about a very small signal booster behind a crystal column that had been sitting in her translation feed for years, undetected. I might have a way, she said. On the Meridian, the communication came through on a frequency that Marcus flagged immediately. This is not a standard band, he said, staring at the signal analysis on his screen. This is running through a Council communication relay, but it's been routed through a resonance masking layer that, he paused. This is my own work. Someone is using my own architecture. Can you decode it? Sam asked. I built it, Marcus said. He had it decoded in 4 minutes. The message was from Elena Cord. It was brief and careful, written in language that would be meaningless to anyone who didn't know the context. The table is moving on Monday. What have you found? You have until Sunday. Yara read the message. She read it standing next to Marcus at the communication console, and when she finished she looked up at Sam, who had been standing quietly in the doorway of the communication bay. They're going to try to block us, she said. Before Monday. What do we do? Sam asked. We transmit everything we have to Elena before Sunday, Yara said. Everything. The first Caro point. The planet. All of it. If we transmit on Council-adjacent frequencies there's a risk they intercept it, Marcus said. Use the masking layer, Yara said. It's not designed for high-volume data. It can handle text messages, coordinates, small packages. Yara thought for a second. Then we transmit coordinates. Just coordinates. Elena is smart enough to know what to do with them. And if the resolution passes anyway? Sam asked. Yara looked at him. She looked at the star map on the wall. She looked at the data on the screens, the Caro point, the planet, all the readings from 9 days in the Outer Rim that already exceeded in scope what Earth's official missions had done in years. If the resolution passes, she said, then it passes. And we keep working. Because the Outer Rim is 300 light-years of unclaimed space and the Council's enforcement capacity in this region is, she paused, looking at James, who had been standing in the corner with his arms crossed. Limited, James said. Their patrol coverage in the outer rim is approximately 12% of total area at current fleet deployment. They cannot enforce a resolution out here. Not really. So the resolution is a document, Yara said. It's a very serious document, Sam said. Yes, Yara agreed. A very serious document that we will take very seriously. She picked up the red marker from the console. She walked to the star map. She drew a careful circle around the coordinates of the planet they had found. She wrote 2 words inside the circle in her neat, precise handwriting. New home. Then she put the cap back on the marker and said, "Send the coordinates to Elena." Elena received the coordinates on Saturday morning. She looked at them. She did not recognize the specific sector immediately. Her expertise was diplomatic, not cartographic, but she recognized what the second set of coordinates had to be. She had seen enough planetary survey data to recognize the format of atmospheric chemistry readings when they were embedded in a coordinate package. A planet. She sat with this for a long time. She sat in her quarters while Duran turned below and the station hummed around her and the council prepared for its Monday emergency session. She thought about what it meant to have a planet. Not a trading post, not a survey station, not a shared facility managed by committee. A planet. Land. Somewhere that was not borrowed or permitted or reviewed every 40 years. Somewhere that was real in the way that only solid ground under your feet can be real. She thought about all the people on Earth who had been told no. All the applications rejected for reasons that had nothing to do with ability. All the researchers whose data had been classified. All the ambassadors sitting at the far end of the table behind crystal columns. She thought about Pell, the cleaner who had told her the vote was unfair and had been right. She thought about Daniel, sitting 2 rooms away right now, probably going through council communications looking for patterns. She opened her document, the plan she had started writing after the first vote, 3 years ago. She scrolled to the last thing she had written. Humans have never had the advantage. She had underlined it. She added a new line. Until now. The Monday session was intense in the way that council sessions were intense. Not loud, not dramatic in any visual sense, but charged with the kind of tension that professional diplomats generated when they were trying very hard to be calm about something they actually cared deeply about. The resolution was introduced by the Veth ambassador, an ancient being named Sorrel who was 300 years old and moved with the careful slowness of someone who had learned that patience was the most powerful tool in any room. Sorrel presented the resolution in the measured, even tone of someone who believed they were simply tidying up an administrative matter. Elena listened. She voted no. 22 non-founding species voted no. The resolution passed 31 to 22. It was the same count as the original compact vote. Elena waited for the session to close. She stood up. She gathered her notes. She did not go behind her column this time. She walked to the center of the chamber floor, which was technically permitted during the post-session period, though rarely done. She stood there for a moment in the empty chamber. The soft blue light of the table. The 54 seats. Her seat, visible from here, partially behind the crystal column. She took out her communicator. She sent a message to Hanako. Resolution passed. Expected outcome. The coordinates are real. Advise Earth government to prepare. Things are about to change. She put the communicator away. She walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the crystal column caught the light and scattered it in small pieces across the floor. The meridian descended through the atmosphere of the planet on a Tuesday. Lena had calculated the entry trajectory 3 times and executed it with the smooth precision that had become everyone's default expectation of her. The ship came through the cloud layer and broke into open air above a landscape that made every person on board stop whatever they were doing and stand at the nearest window. It was green. Wide, rolling terrain covered in vegetation that was not quite grass and not quite moss but somewhere between, a deep, dark green that caught the light of the planet's sun and held it. There were trees or tree equivalents, tall structures with broad canopies that spread like opened hands. There were hills. There was a river visible from the air, wide and silver gray, cutting through the green in a slow, easy curve. And there was color. Not just green. The vegetation had variations, patches of deeper color here and there, something close to purple, something close to blue-green, something that was almost red at the very edges where the sun hit it at a low angle. I need to be outside, Priya said. It was not a request. It was a statement of biological certainty. Give me 10 minutes to confirm atmospheric readings at surface level, Sam said. He was already at the sensor console, pulling in data from the descent. The orbital readings were clean, but I want surface confirmation before anyone opens a hatch. 10 minutes later, the confirmation was clean. Atmosphere breathable. Surface temperature 21 degrees. Mild, comfortable, like a good spring day. No biological hazards detected in the immediate landing zone. No large-scale predator signatures within sensor range. Lena set the meridian down in a flat clearing near the river. The landing was soft, so soft that the change from flight to ground was barely noticeable, just a gentle settling like sitting down carefully in a chair. The ramp opened. Priya was the first one down. She walked out into the air of a world that no human had ever stood on before, and she breathed in and she stood still for a moment with her eyes closed and her face tilted up toward the light. Then she opened her eyes and started taking samples. Sam came down next. He walked a few steps away from the ramp and stood on the ground, the actual ground firm under his boots, and looked around. The sounds were different here. There was something moving in the trees. The wind in the vegetation made a sound that was slightly higher pitched than wind in earth grass. The river in the distance had a particular quality to its sound, something between a rush and a hum. HFY, he said quietly to no one in particular. From now on for me. It was something his grandmother used to say when she was starting something new. Something real. Something that mattered. Marcus came down and immediately started walking the perimeter, checking the ground for stability, looking at the tree structures with an engineer's eye for what they were and what they could support. James came down and did the same thing Marcus was doing, but from a security perspective, looking at sight lines, at the natural geography of the clearing, at the river and what it meant in terms of water supply and natural barrier. The others filtered out over the next few minutes until everyone was on the ground. 8 humans on a planet in the outer rim that no other species in the galaxy's governing council knew existed. They stood there in the clearing for a few minutes, not doing anything official, not conducting formal surveys or filing reports. Just standing there. Being on the planet. Being somewhere new. It was Lena who finally said what everyone was thinking. We should name it, she said. There was a pause. Then Yara said, I'd like to call it something simple. Something that means what it is. Home, Priya said. Just home. Yara thought about it. Not just home. Something with more weight. She looked around at the landscape. The green. The river. The trees with their spread canopies. Reach, she said. Because we reached for it. Reach, Sam repeated. You liked it. It was the kind of word that worked as both a noun and a verb. As a name and as a description of how you got there. Reach, Marcus said. He nodded once. That was as much enthusiasm as Marcus showed for anything that wasn't engineering. Reach, Lena said. She smiled. It was a wide, real smile. Reach, James said. Reach, Priya said, looking up from her first samples. Officially. Yara took out the red marker. She walked back up the ramp into the meridian. She went to the star map. She crossed out new home in the circle she had drawn and wrote reach in its place. Then she came back out and stood in the clearing and looked at the trees and the river and the green. They spent 4 days on reach. 4 days of data collection, surface survey, mapping, testing, and the kind of careful, methodical science that Priya had spent her whole career preparing to do. What she found confirmed the orbital readings and then went significantly beyond them. The soil was rich, dense with complex organic compounds, the kind of soil that on Earth would be considered exceptional farmland. The water in the river was clean, its chemistry compatible with human biology after basic filtration. The plant life was non-toxic across all species tested. There was animal life, small creatures, nothing larger than a dog, nothing aggressive, everything either curious or indifferent to the humans moving through their environment. There were also trees, real trees structurally, with a wood-like material in their trunks that tested as both strong and workable. There was stone in the hills, good building stone, accessible, abundant. There was a natural harbor-like curve in the river 3 kilometers from the landing site that would make an excellent foundation for whatever you wanted to build there. On the 3rd day, Sam found the 4th Caro point. It was not far from the planet, relatively speaking in space terms. Close enough that a ship traveling from the Caro point transit entry could reach Reach's orbit in less than a day at standard speed. Which meant that Reach was not just habitable and rich with resources. Reach was positioned next to a natural highway through the galaxy. Sam sat with this data for a long time before he told Yara. When he did tell her, he showed her the analysis, walked her through every step of the calculation, made sure she understood exactly what the numbers meant. Yara sat with it for a long time too. This changes things, she finally said. Yes, Sam said. We're not talking about a quiet survey mission anymore, Yara said. No. If there are 9 more Caro points and they follow the arc we calculated, she stopped. Then Reach is at the center of a network, Sam said. Not metaphorically. Literally at the center. The arc puts the remaining points distributed around it. Whoever controls Reach controls the hub. Yara looked at the star map. She looked at the planet they were currently sitting on. She looked at the red circle and the word she had written. The council is going to find out eventually, she said. Yes. And when they do? It won't matter, Sam said. Because by then we'll have the data, we'll have the location, and we'll have been here first. Yara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that was not strategic or analytical or cartographic. She said it simply, as a person, as a human being sitting on a planet that felt like possibility made physical. Sam, she said. I think we just changed the game. Back on Earth, Hanako Mori received the full data package on a Thursday afternoon. She read it in her office with the door locked and her assistant told to hold all calls. She read the planet data first. Then the Caro Point locations, 4 now with the ARC calculation predicting 7 more. Then the strategic analysis that Yara had included, plain and unvarnished, about what the network meant. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a while. Then she picked up a secure line and called the director of Earth's Strategic Development Council, a body that had existed for 30 years and had, in Hanako's honest opinion, never had very much to be strategic about until right now. We need to talk, she said. About the future. Elena Cord was called in for an individual session with the VETH Ambassador Sorrel 2 weeks after the emergency resolution. This was unusual. Individual sessions with the VETH were rare. The VETH did not typically engage in bilateral conversations. They preferred the collective authority of the full chamber, which gave their words the backing of institutional weight rather than personal opinion. The session was held in a small meeting room off the main corridor. Sorrel was already seated when Elena arrived. The VETH were tall and thin, with pale blue-white skin that seemed to carry its own faint luminescence, and eyes that were large and a deep, flat black. Sorrel was old even by VETH standards. The age showed not in deterioration. The VETH did not deteriorate the way humans did, but in a particular stillness. The stillness of a very old being who has decided that most movement is unnecessary. Ambassador Cord, Sorrel said. The voice was soft and even, like water over flat stone. Thank you for your time. Of course, Elena said. She sat. There was a pause. The VETH were comfortable with pauses in a way that unsettled most non-VETH species. Elena had learned to be comfortable with them too. She sat and waited. The unauthorized survey vessel, Sorrel said finally. We believe it is human. You mentioned that in the council report, Elena said. I am mentioning it again, Sorrel said, in a context where your response will not be recorded and will not be part of the formal record. Elena looked at the ambassador carefully. What would you like to know? She asked. I would like to know whether Earth's government is aware of the vessel's activities. Elena considered the question. She considered it fully and honestly the way she always considered things. Ambassador Sorrel, she said, Earth's government is aware that Earth's citizens have the right to conduct independent activity in unclaimed space. It was a true sentence. It was also a carefully selected one. Sorrel was silent for a moment. Is that a yes? It is an accurate statement of Earth's legal position. Another pause. Sorrel looked at her with those flat black eyes. In 300 years, Sorrel had met a great many diplomats. Elena had been told this by someone who had known the ambassador for 30 years. She had been told that Sorrel had a particular respect for people who chose their words precisely rather than abundantly. Ambassador Cord, Sorrel said. I am going to tell you something that does not leave this room. Elena waited. The council is concerned, Sorrel said. Not about the survey vessel specifically. About what it represents. Which is a pattern, Sorrel said. Humans have been members of this council for 8 years. In 8 years you have, without resources, without established allies, without the advantages that species with centuries of council membership enjoy, produced original scientific discoveries, built independent operational capacity, and continue to function effectively despite systematic disadvantages. Elena said nothing. She let the words be what they were. This concerns some members of the council, Sorrel said. Why? Elena asked. She knew why. But she wanted Sorrel to say it. Because advantage has a way of eroding, Sorrel said simply. And those who have held it the longest are often the least prepared when it does. Elena looked at the ambassador. She thought about the vote. The crystal column. The 40-year infrastructure cycle. Pell saying the vote was unfair and meaning it. She thought about Sam Reyes applying to the Exploration Division 3 times and being rejected and going anyway. She thought about Reach, the planet she had only seen as coordinates but that she felt somehow in her chest like a fact about something important. I appreciate your candor, Ambassador, she said. I am not offering candor as a gift, Sorrel said. I am offering it as a courtesy. There is a difference. What kind of courtesy? The kind that comes with a suggestion, Sorrel said. Whatever your people are doing in the Outer Rim, and I will not pretend I do not understand what that means, I would suggest that they move with greater care. Not because the Council will stop them. We cannot stop them realistically in a space that large. But because the Council's reaction when the full scope of what they find becomes public, will be significant. Significant, Elena repeated. Yes. Elena stood up. She smoothed her jacket. She put her notes in her bag. She looked at Sorrel and said, Ambassador, With respect, the Council had an opportunity to work with humanity as a genuine partner 8 years ago. It had an opportunity at every vote since. What happens in the Outer Rim is a consequence of those choices. Sorrel looked at her for a long time. That flat black gaze. That ancient stillness. Yes, the ambassador said finally. I know. Elena walked out of the room. In the corridor she paused. She pulled out her communicator. She sent a message to Hanako, not the full account of the conversation which she would report properly through secure channels later, but a single line, because sometimes a single line was enough. They know something is coming. Tell Yara to move faster. Yara received the message through Marcus's encrypted channel as the Meridian was completing its initial orbital survey of Reach. She read it. She called the team together in the main cabin. We have a timeline, she said. How long? Marcus asked. Not long enough, Yara said. We need to find the remaining Caro points. We need to complete the survey of Reach to the depth that makes any future legal challenge to our data essentially impossible. And we need to do it before the Council mounts a significant presence in this region. James, Sam said looking at the retired lieutenant commander. The Council's survey fleet. The 12 ships that went into the Outer Rim after the compact vote. They're 3 weeks away from this sector at their current pace, James said. I've been tracking their emission signatures on our long-range array. 3 weeks, Yara said. Give or take. They're being methodical. Stopping at catalog points to install monitoring infrastructure. That's slowing them down. Then we have 3 weeks, Yara said. Let's use them. What followed was the most intense 3 weeks of every person's life on the Meridian. They found 3 more Caro points in rapid succession. Sam's resonance array, now fully calibrated and running at peak performance, was identifying gravitational anomalies faster than anyone had expected. Each find was documented with the kind of thoroughness that would stand up to any scientific scrutiny, multiple measurement methods, redundant data sets, time-stamped entries in a ledger that Marcus kept encrypted on 3 separate drives. Priya completed a survey of Reach's surface across a coverage area large enough to establish definitively that the planet's habitability was consistent, not localized. She had surface samples from 47 different locations. She had atmospheric readings from 6 different altitudes. She had water samples from the river, from a smaller tributary system they found on the southern continent, and from a natural lake near the planet's equator that was so clear you could see the bottom from the air. Lena charted navigational routes between the Caro points they had found, mapping how they could be linked, what kind of travel times they would enable, how a network based around these points would restructure the movement of ships across the region. She did it with the same calm efficiency she brought to everything, sitting in the navigation chair with her leg tucked under her, but the scale of what she was drawing was breathtaking. The routes she was charting would, when complete, make the Outer Rim not a remote edge of the known galaxy but a central passage through it. Marcus spent his time building something he had been thinking about since before the mission left Earth. He called it the Claim Documentation System. It was not glamorous technology. It was a rigorous, comprehensive, legally constructed digital archive of everything the Meridian had found, documented in formats that met the standards of every applicable treaty framework, including the Council's own documentation protocols. If anyone ever tried to contest what the Meridian had done in the Outer Rim, Marcus's archive would be the answer. James spent his time doing something that seemed less urgent but turned out to matter enormously. He was writing a report, a full strategic assessment of the Outer Rim as a geopolitical space. What it meant, who was in it, what the power dynamics looked like now and what they would look like if the Caro Point network was established and functioning, who benefited from the current arrangement and who didn't, what leverage the discovery of Reach gave Earth, and how that leverage should be deployed. He wrote it carefully. He wrote it the way someone writes something they know will be read by people with a great deal of power and a great deal of stake in the answer. On the last day of the 3 weeks, with a single Caro point still not found, the one that should have been at the far end of the arc but whose signal was elusive, Sam sat in the sensor bay at 2 in the morning and refused to go to sleep. Yara came in and found him at his console. Go to sleep, she said. Not yet. Sam. There's one more, he said. The arc doesn't complete without it. Without it, the network has a gap. A navigational gap right at the point where you'd want to make the turn between the southern corridor and the inner arc. Without that point, the route is 40% slower. 40% is still faster than anything the Council has, Yara said. I know, Sam said. But I found 11. I want to find 12. Yara looked at him. She had known from the day he walked into the Houston office that he was someone who would not stop when it was reasonable to stop. She had hired him because of that quality. She was not going to tell him to stop now. She sat down in the other chair. What are you looking for? The signal is there, Sam said. I can see the edge of it. It's faint. But it's consistent. He turned the screen toward her. Here. This reading. Every 47 minutes, there's a fluctuation in the background resonance that's too regular to be random. It's like, he paused, searching for the word. It's like a heartbeat. Very faint. Very regular. Yara looked at the reading. She looked at it for a long time. The point is active, she said slowly. Not dormant. The other 11, they were stable, steady, constant resonance. This one is pulsing. Right? Sam said. Which means it's larger, Yara said. Sam nodded. Much larger. The pulse pattern in a Caro point is proportional to the gravitational mass of the anomaly. If this reading is right, he paused. He had run the calculation 3 times because the first time he had assumed he had made a mistake. How large? Yara asked. Large enough, Sam said, that it wouldn't just be a highway. It would be a gateway. Something that big, the transit capacity would be essentially unlimited. You could move an entire fleet through it at once. The room was very quiet. Find it, Yara said. Caro, he said softly, the word that meant already on it, the quiet affirmation of someone who doesn't need to be told twice. His fingers went back to the console. He found it at 6:17 in the morning. He did not shout. He did not call for anyone. He sat and looked at the data on his screen for 3 minutes, making absolutely sure of what he was seeing. He ran every check he had. He verified the readings from 3 different angles. He cross-referenced with the arc calculation, which now fit perfectly, 12 points, complete arc, elegant as a mathematical proof. Then he went and knocked on Yara's door. She opened it quickly. She had not been sleeping. I found it, he said. She came out. She went to the sensor bay. She looked at the screen. The 12th Caro point was the largest natural gravitational anomaly detected in the outer rim, possibly in the known galaxy. The data Sam had was preliminary but consistent. The transit capacity of this single point exceeded the combined capacity of the other 11. And it was 8 hours from reach at standard speed. Yara sat down. She put her hands flat on the console, the way Priya had pressed her hands flat when she was trying to stay steady. HFY, she said quietly. From now on for me. She had heard Sam say it on the surface of reach and it had stuck. It was the right kind of phrase for a moment like this. Not triumphant. Not victorious. Just clear. An acknowledgement that something had changed. That before this moment was one thing and after this moment was something else. HFY, Sam agreed. The message that arrived from James Okafor's long-range monitoring array on the morning of day 22 was not the Council fleet. It was worse in a way. It was 3 Council ships, smaller than the main fleet, faster, equipped with the kind of sensor arrays that were used for rapid response rather than systematic survey. Interceptors. The kind of ships that were dispatched not to explore but to arrive. James brought the report to the full team in the main cabin. 3 ships, he said. Interceptor class. They're not coming from the direction of the main fleet. They're coming from a different vector. From where? Lena asked, already working at the navigation console. From the second Caro point, James said. The one the Council fleet has been working on. They came through it, Lena said. Her voice was steady but her eyes had sharpened. They used our point to get here faster. They weren't supposed to know how to use it yet, Marcus said. They had 2 years to analyze our original data, Yara said quietly. And apparently they've been learning. There was a silence in the cabin. Not a comfortable one. Arrival time? Yara asked. At their current speed, 36 hours, James said. Can we be gone before then? Sam asked, looking at Lena. We can be gone in 4 hours, Lena said. But. She paused. She looked at Yara. If we leave now without completing the documentation. Marcus, Yara said. Status on the archive. 89% complete, Marcus said. I need 6 more hours to finish the final verification layers. Can you do it in 4? Yara asked. Not without cutting corners. And cutting corners in the documentation is the one thing we can't afford to do. Yara absorbed this. She looked at the group. She looked at the star map. She thought about the 12 Caro points and the planet called Reach and 6 more hours of documentation and 3 interceptors coming through a point that humanity had discovered and which the Council was now apparently comfortable using without so much as a notification. We don't run, she said. James looked at her. Yara? We don't run, she repeated. We're not doing anything illegal. This is unclaimed space. We have a right to be here and a right to document what we find. Running looks guilty. Running gives them a narrative. Standing here when 3 interceptors arrive does not give us the moral high ground if they decide to board, James said. He said it plainly, not as an argument against her but as a fact that needed to be acknowledged. They won't board us, Elena said. Everyone turned. Elena's voice had come from the communication console, a channel that Marcus had opened to the station that morning for the daily check-in. She was on the screen, small and clear against the background of her quarters on Veyrath Prime. Ambassador, Yara said. I've been listening, Elena said. Sorry for not announcing myself. The Council interceptors are not authorized to board non-affiliated vessels in unclaimed space under current treaty law. The resolution that passed does not grant boarding rights. It restricts data use, but it does not create enforcement jurisdiction over the person or the vessel. They could claim we're violating the resolution and use that as, James started. They could claim it, Elena said. But the claim would be contested immediately by 22 non-founding council members who have been looking for a procedural opening to challenge the resolution since the day it passed. I know because I've been organizing that challenge quietly for 2 weeks. Pause. They board you, they give me exactly the procedural ground I need. There was a moment of quiet. Then Marcus said, with the slight tone of someone who has just had a calculation confirmed, she's been waiting for them to make a mistake. I've been waiting for them to make a mistake, Elena agreed. Stay where you are. Finish the documentation. When the interceptors arrive, be professional, be calm, be obviously doing science. If they hail you, respond politely. Don't hide anything. Let them see that you're conducting a legitimate survey. And if they push further? Yara asked. Then push back, Elena said. Legally. On the record. With every word of it logged in Marcus's archive. Yara looked at Marcus. She's right, he said. Yara looked at James. She's right, he said. It cost him something to say it. He had spent 12 years in military service where the calculus was physical rather than procedural, but he said it. Finish the archive, Yara said to Marcus. 6 hours. Whatever you need. Marcus nodded and went to work. The Council interceptors arrived in 31 hours, 5 hours ahead of James's estimate, because they had pushed their engines harder than the standard calculation assumed. They dropped out of FTL travel at the edge of Reach's orbital space and immediately opened a communication channel to the Meridian. The officer who appeared on screen was Veth, young for a Veth, which meant 200 years old, with the same blue-white skin and flat black eyes as Sorrel but without the ancient stillness. This was someone who had been given an assignment and was carrying it out with the particular rigidity of the recently empowered. This is Captain Var of the Galactic Council Enforcement Division, the officer said. You are in violation of the Outer Rim Governance Compact as amended by Resolution 7 Gamma. Please identify yourself and state your purpose in this sector. Yara was at the communication console. She had a mug of tea. She had changed into clean clothes. She looked, very deliberately, like someone who had been interrupted during a normal working day. This is Dr. Yara Singh, Director of the Outer Rim Survey Initiative, operating the survey vessel Meridian, she said. We are conducting independent scientific survey work in unclaimed Outer Rim space. Can I ask the basis for your claim of a violation? My understanding is that Resolution 7 Gamma restricts the administrative use of survey data, not the conduct of survey activities in unclaimed regions. A pause on the other end. The captain had clearly expected either immediate compliance or aggressive defiance. Yara's calm, technical response seemed to require recalibration. The resolution prohibits unauthorized survey activity in regions subject to the Outer Rim Governance Compact, the captain said. I'd welcome a citation, Yara said pleasantly. The version of the resolution I have in my records applies the compact's scope to areas containing previously documented Caro points. Our current location is outside that defined scope. Could you provide the article and section number you're referencing? Another pause. Longer this time. There was movement off-screen. Marcus, behind Yara, allowed himself a small nod of satisfaction. The captain came back. We are requesting access to your vessel's data records, the captain said. I'm afraid that's not something I can accommodate without a formal warrant issued under applicable treaty law, Yara said. I'm happy to provide our mission registration documents, our crew manifest, and our vessel certification, which I believe are the items I'm actually required to provide under current intercept protocol. Is that what you need? The captain stared at her. Yara looked back with complete professional composure. She took a sip of her tea. Stand by, the captain said and cut the feed. Yara kept her face neutral until the feed was dark. Then she slowly exhaled. That was very good, Sam said from somewhere behind her. Marcus, she said without turning around. How close are we? 4%, Marcus said. 20 minutes. Good, she said. She picked up her tea and waited. The captain hailed again 40 minutes later. The tone was different. Whatever consultation had happened in the intervening time, and Elena's quiet diplomatic work on Veyrath Prime was almost certainly part of it. The edge was gone from the captain's voice. Dr. Singh, the captain said, we have reviewed the legal parameters of the current situation. We will require your mission registration, crew manifest, and vessel certification for our records. Of course, Yara said. Transmitting now. She nodded at Marcus, who sent the documents, all of which were completely in order, prepared months ago by a legal team that Carlingwyn had quietly funded. We will also note in our report that an unofficial human survey vessel has been operating in this sector, the captain said. Please do, Yara said. I'd appreciate an official record of our presence. It supports our documentation. A beat. Then, you are free to continue your operations, Dr. Singh. We will be monitoring. Thank you, Captain, Yara said. We appreciate the company. The feed closed. The cabin was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then Lena made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a breath of relief. Sam let out a long exhale. Marcus, who had completed the final verification layer on the archive 35 seconds earlier, set down his tools and sat back in his chair and was very still for a moment. The archive is complete, he said. Everything? Yara asked. Everything, Marcus said. All 12 Caro points. Full planetary survey of reach. Navigational routes. The whole picture. Documented, verified, time-stamped, legally watertight. Yara looked at the star map. She looked at the 12 red circles, the red lines connecting them, the planet called Reach at the center. Then we're done, she said. Time to go home. The Meridian returned to Earth on a Sunday. They came in through standard arrival channels, filed all the correct documentation with Earth Space Traffic Authority, and landed in the Houston hangar where the ship had started. The hangar was the same. The fluorescent lights were still slightly buzzing on the left side. The concrete floor had the same oil stain near the back wall. What was not the same was the group of people waiting. Carlingwyn was there, he had funded the mission and he deserved to be first. He was not a demonstrative man, but he shook Yara's hand with both of his and held it for a moment, and that said enough. Hanako Mori was there. She was in a dark coat and she had her hands in her pockets and she watched the team come down the ramp with the expression of someone seeing the confirmation of something they had believed in the dark. There were 12 other people from Earth's Strategic Development Council. There were 3 scientists from the space agency who had been quietly briefed. There were 2 legal analysts who specialized in galactic treaty law. There was no press. There was no public announcement. This was still the kind of thing that happened in rooms and hangar bays, not on broadcast. Yara walked up to Hanako. Do you have what you need? Hanako asked. We have everything, Yara said. Tell me. 12 Caro points. A fully habitable planet positioned at the center of the network. Complete survey documentation that meets every legal standard for territorial claim under current treaty law. And the largest single Caro point ever recorded, 8 hours from the planet. Hanako was quiet for a moment. The largest ever. By a significant margin. If you want to understand what that means strategically, James has written a full assessment. I'll read it tonight, Hanako said. We have a meeting Monday morning. The Strategic Council. The government's senior cabinet. They need to hear all of this. I'll be there, Yara said. So will the rest of your team, Hanako said. She looked past Yara at the others coming down the ramp. Marcus, Sam, Lena, Priya, James and the 6 others. 8 people who had gone out into the dark and come back with something that changed the shape of the world. Sam was the last one down the ramp. He stood at the bottom of it and looked at the hangar, the concrete, the fluorescent lights, the oil stain, the group of people all talking in their various serious, quiet, urgent ways. He thought about his grandmother saying HFY every time she started something that mattered. He thought about the cold coffee and the rejection letter and the small posting on the employment website with the logo that looked like it had been designed in 20 minutes. He thought about standing on the surface of Reach with his boots in the dark green ground and the river sound and the trees with their spread hand canopies. He thought, this is what after looks like. The Monday meeting ran for 6 hours. Yara presented the data. James presented the strategic analysis. Marcus walked the legal team through the documentation architecture and watched them become very quietly pleased. Priya gave the planetary survey findings in a presentation that was methodical and technical and that still managed to make 3 separate government ministers visibly moved. The questions were thorough. The Strategic Council was not made up of easily impressed people. They had been working in space policy and development for years, navigating the complicated reality of being a newer species in a galaxy that had been organized without them. They asked hard questions. They found the edges of the data and pressed on them. They were not satisfied with vague answers or approximate figures. The team gave them exact answers. Because they had exact answers. Because they had done the work. At the end of 6 hours, there was a quiet in the room. A specific kind of quiet that comes when a group of careful, experienced people have processed something significant and are all arriving at the same understanding simultaneously. The Minister of External Affairs, a woman named Dr. Sarah Obi who had spent 30 years in off-world policy, finally said, What do we do with this? Yara looked at her. We make it official, she said. We file formal documentation of discovery under the Galactic Territorial Charter. We publish the Caro Point data through open academic channels, all 12 points, full data accessible to every species in the galaxy. Not exclusive. Open. Open, the minister said. Open, Yara said. The council made the Caro Points their exclusive possession. We respond by making ours everybody's. Every species. Every ship. Free access to the navigational routes, to the data, to the science. We become the people who open the outer rim. And Reach? Anako asked. Reach is ours, Yara said simply. We were there first. The documentation supports it. The territorial charter supports it. We establish a presence. We build. The council will challenge the claim, one of the legal analysts said. They can challenge it, Marcus said. Let them. We built the archive specifically to answer every challenge they can make. And the 12th Caro Point? James asked. He had not included it in the main presentation. He had told Yara privately that he thought it was a card best played at the right moment. This was the right moment. Yara looked at the room. At the minister. At Hanako. At all the careful, experienced people who had been navigating disadvantage for so long that it had become a baseline assumption about how the world worked. The 12th point, she said, is the largest gravitational anomaly ever recorded. Its transit capacity makes it the most strategically important navigational location in the known galaxy. She paused. It is 8 hours from a planet that belongs to humanity. Which means... She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. Every person in the room finished it themselves. Which means we hold the key. Elena Cord received the public data release at the same time everyone else on Veyrath Prime did, through the standard academic broadcast channel that the Outer Rim Survey Initiative had used to publish its findings. 12 Caro Points. Full coordinates. Full navigational data. Open access. Published to every species simultaneously. The council chamber reacted the way Elena had expected it to, with a kind of outrage that was mostly astonishment wearing a formal coat. 48 hours of emergency sessions. Resolution proposals that were drafted and revised and argued over. The 9 founding species spending a great deal of energy trying to determine whether what Earth had done was technically illegal, and a great deal more energy being quietly furious that the answer kept coming back as no. Because it wasn't illegal. Yara had been right about that from the beginning. The territory was unclaimed. The survey was legitimate. The documentation was airtight. The open publication of the data was, and this was the part that really stung, a more transparent and cooperative action than anything the Founding 9 had done in recent memory. Elena sat at her seat behind the column and watched. She voted no on 3 new resolutions. They all passed 31 to 22, and they all did approximately nothing because they tried to restrict activities that had already been completed. Ambassador Sorrel found her in the corridor after the 3rd session. You knew, Sorrel said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. I knew something was happening, Elena said carefully. I trusted the people doing it. The planet, Sorrel said. Reach, Elena said. Yes. You understand what this means. I think so, Elena said. The 12th Caro Point, Sorrel said. There was something in the Veth ambassador's voice that Elena had never heard before in 3 years of knowing this being. Something that took her a moment to identify. Its proximity to the planet creates a strategic situation that the Council has not faced in its history. An outside power with control of a critical navigational node, Elena said. Not just control, Sorrel said. Benevolent open access, which is substantially harder to argue against than exclusion. Elena thought about that. Because you can argue against exclusion on principle, she said. But open access, open to everyone, no conditions, that's harder to frame as a threat. Exactly, Sorrel said. Your people are not very old in this galaxy, Ambassador Cord. But you learn quickly. We've had good teachers, Elena said. Mostly through watching what not to do. There was a long pause. The old Veth ambassador stood in the corridor, still as stone, and looked at Elena with those flat black eyes. The council will want to negotiate, Sorrel said. Yes, Elena said. I imagine it will. What does Earth want from a negotiation? Elena had thought about this. She had been thinking about it since the coordinates first arrived in her message. She had been thinking about it in a deeper way since the night 3 years ago when she had sat behind the crystal column and written her plan. What does Earth actually want? A real seat at the table, she said. Not the seat behind the column. Not number 54. A founding seat. Not because of history, I know we can't rewrite history. But because of now. Because of what we've contributed and what we've proven. A seat that is treated as the equal of the Founding 9. Sorrel was quiet. A permanent presence on the Outer Rim Governance Committee, Elena continued. With full decision-making rights on the Caro Point network, all 15 points, the original 3 and the 12 we found. Shared governance, not exclusion. And Reach, full territorial recognition of Reach as Earth's sovereign territory. In exchange for what? Sorrel asked. Open access to the 12th Caro Point for all Council species, Elena said. Including the Founding 9. We don't close it. We share it. Same as we published everything else. You would give that up? We don't see it as giving it up, Elena said. We see it as what cooperation actually looks like. Not what the Council has called cooperation for 600 years. Sorrel looked at her for a long time. I will convey this position, the ambassador said. I cannot promise how it will be received. I know, Elena said. But I think you know how it should be received. She turned and walked down the corridor toward her quarters. Behind her, she heard the faint sound of the Veth ambassador beginning to move, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of 3 centuries of living, in the direction of the Council's private chambers. Back on Earth, Sam was sitting on his old roof. He had come back to Denver for a week before the negotiations were scheduled to begin. He needed the place. He needed the familiar roof with the receiver array he had built with his own hands at the age of 23, some of it still working, some of it now outdated by the professional equipment he had spent the last months operating, but all of it his. Built on nothing but curiosity and time and a refusal to wait for permission. His sister Rosa came up to the roof with 2 coffees. She handed him one. She sat beside him on the plastic lawn chair he had been using for 6 years. Are you okay? She said. I'm fine, he said. People keep saying your name on the news, she said. I know. Mom cried when she saw the interview. I know. She told me. Rosa looked up at the sky. The stars were partially obscured by city light but some were visible. The band of the Milky Way faint but there. Which one is Reach? She asked. You can't see it from here, Sam said. Wrong direction. And it's 40 light years past the boundary. But it's out there. Yes, Sam said. It's out there. Rosa was quiet for a moment. When you applied to the Exploration Division the 3rd time and they said no again, she stopped. What about it? I wanted to tell you to stop, she said. I was going to. I almost did. I thought maybe you should just accept how things were. Sam looked at his sister. She was 3 years older than him and had always been the practical one. The one who planned. The one who understood how the world worked and worked within it. Why didn't you? He asked. She looked at the sky. Because you sent me that link, she said. The Outer Rim Survey Initiative. And I looked at their posting and I thought, she paused. I thought anyone who wrote that posting, no prior council experience required, commitment and curiosity valued above credentials. Anyone who wrote that believed something. And I thought you should see if they meant it. They meant it, Sam said. They meant it, Rosa agreed. He drank his coffee. She drank hers. The city moved below them, ordinary and alive. And the sky above was the same sky it had always been, full and dark and deep, going on further than any lifetime could account for. The negotiation sessions began on a Wednesday and ran for 3 weeks. Elena led for Earth. She had Hanako at her side and Daniel behind her taking notes and a legal team of 4. On the council side, the lead was a species called the Durith, the second oldest of the Founding 9, historically the most pragmatic, and the ones who had the most to gain from the 12th Caro Point because of where their territory was located relative to the Outer Rim. It was not easy. Nothing in galactic diplomacy was easy, and the stakes here were high enough that every word was weighed carefully on all sides. The Founding 9 spent the first week trying to establish that Earth's territorial claim to Reach was procedurally irregular. Elena's legal team spent that same week walking them through 47 different points of treaty law that supported the claim's validity. Marcus's documentation archive was presented on day 3 and the Council's legal staff spent most of day 4 going through it, and what came out of day 4 was a very quiet acknowledgement that the documentation was, in fact, airtight. The second week was about the Caro Points. The Founding 9's position was that the original 3 Caro Points, having been placed under compact governance, should be the template for managing all 15. Elena's position was that the Compact's governance model had been built without Earth's meaningful participation and represented exactly the kind of exclusionary process that had brought them to this point. The open publication of Earth's 12 points, already in use by 17 different species who had begun incorporating the navigational data into their flight routes, was evidence of what genuine open governance looked like. The Durith ambassador, a solidly built being named Thresh with amber eyes and a direct manner that Elena found refreshing after years of Veth indirectness, finally said on day 11, "What you are describing is a different governance model entirely. Not an amendment to the Compact. A replacement." "Yes," Elena said. "The Outer Rim Navigation Accord. 15 points, managed collectively by all 54 council species with equal decision-making rights. Not 9. All 54. The founding 9 would have the same vote as a species that joined the council last decade? In matters concerning the Outer Rim, yes, Elena said. Because the Outer Rim is not 600 years old. It is new. Discovered by a species that has been in the council for 8 years. This is a chance to build something right from the beginning instead of inheriting something built wrong. Thresh looked at her for a long time. You are essentially arguing that this discovery creates a political reset. I'm arguing that it creates an opportunity, Elena said. What is done with that opportunity is a choice. The third week was about reach. This was where it became personal. The founding 9 had no real legal standing to challenge the territorial claim. Marcus's documentation had closed that door firmly. What they had was leverage, specifically the leverage of their voting bloc on the broader council. Reach's recognition as Earth's sovereign territory required a council vote, and the founding 9 controlled enough votes to complicate that. Elena had been thinking about this for weeks. She had been thinking about the 22 non-founding species who had voted no both times. 22 species who had been sitting at their own far ends of their own tables. 22 species who had been told, in various ways, that their contributions were appreciated but their governance rights were not quite equivalent. She had been talking to their ambassadors. Quietly, one at a time, over the course of the 3 weeks before the negotiations began. Not promising them things she couldn't deliver. Just asking them questions. Listening to what they wanted. Finding out what a real seat at the table meant to each of them, because it meant something slightly different to everyone. And offering, if Earth got what it was asking for, an equal seat, a real voice, Earth would use that voice to keep asking for the same for everyone else. It was not a cynical offer. It was a genuine one. Elena had sat behind a crystal column for 3 years. She was not going to get a better chair and stop caring about everyone still behind their columns. The vote on Reach's territorial recognition took place on a Friday afternoon. Elena sat at her seat, still behind the column, still partially obscured, because the vote on the seating arrangement itself was scheduled for after this one. She sat straight. She looked at the chamber. She thought about 600 years of this institution. She thought about everything it was and everything it had failed to be. The vote was 38 to 15. 38. 16 of those votes came from the non-founding species bloc. The remaining majority came from 7 of the founding 9. The Durith had swung 3 others with them. Only the Veth and 1 allied founding species had voted no. Earth's territorial claim to reach was recognized. Elena sat behind the column and let out a breath that she had been holding, it felt like, for 3 years. Then she straightened up. Because there was more to do. Reach in its first year was not a city. It was not even a settlement. It was a beginning. The first permanent human presence on Reach arrived on a ship called the Foundation, an intentional name chosen by Hanako and approved by the government with the kind of unanimity that rare important moments produce. The Foundation carried 200 people. Engineers, scientists, architects, farmers, doctors, teachers, and 1 astrophysicist named Sam Reyes who had accepted a position as Reach's founding director of scientific development. It also carried Marcus Webb, who had been appointed chief infrastructure officer, and Priya Anand, who was now the head of the Reach Biological Survey Institute, which at the moment consisted of herself, 4 graduate students, and a lot of excellent soil samples. Lena Park did not stay on Reach. She was not a planet person, she said simply. She was a navigator. The Outer Rim had 12, now 15, Caro points and 300 light-years of space to chart, and she intended to keep charting it. She came back to Reach 3 times in that first year to deliver supplies and data and once to attend a small ceremony at the river site that Sam had identified as the best location for the first permanent building. The building went up in the 6th month. It was not grand. It was a low, functional structure built from the local stone, with large windows that looked out over the river. It served as a lab, a meeting space, a common room, and on the nights when the planet's moon was full and the light came through the windows and spread across the stone floor, something that felt unmistakably like home. James Okafor came to Reach in the 7th month. He came as a private citizen, having officially completed his consultation contract with Earth's Strategic Council. He came because he had read his own report, the one he had written on the Meridian, the full assessment of the Outer Rim as a geopolitical space, and had concluded that the most important strategic development currently underway in the galaxy was happening on this particular planet, and he intended to be part of it rather than a distant observer. He built a house near the first building. It was small and sensible and had a clear sight line to the river. He planted things in the ground outside it, practical things, vegetables, plants from Earth that Priya had tested for compatibility with Reach's soil. They grew. They grew better than the same plants grew in comparable conditions on Earth, because the soil of Reach was extraordinary and responded to cultivation with a generosity that Priya documented carefully and shared with every agricultural scientist she knew. In the 8th month, Carlingwin arrived. He arrived with a second ship and a third wave of settlers and a personal investment in the development of Reach's infrastructure that was larger than the entire initial government allocation. Carl was not a man who did things halfway. He had believed in humanity's potential in the Outer Rim before there was any evidence it was possible, and now that there was overwhelming evidence, he was prepared to act accordingly. He and Yara spent a lot of time walking the land around the first building, planning, talking through what the next 5 years should look like, and the 10 years after that and the 50 years after that. Yara drew on everything as she went, rock faces, trees, the occasional patch of bare ground, sketching plans that were not architectural drawings but something more like arguments for a future. Sam watched this happening and felt something that was not exactly contentment and not exactly pride but something between the two. Something that had the solidity of stone and the quality of light. Something that he recognized, eventually, as the feeling of a thing that was right. In the 9th month, Elena Cord resigned her ambassadorship. It was not a sudden decision. She had been thinking about it since the vote on Reach's recognition. She had done what she had come to Veyrath Prime to do, and then well beyond it. The new governance framework for the Outer Rim was in place. The Outer Rim Navigation Accord had been ratified by 41 of the 54 council species. Reach was recognized. Earth had a full council seat, not behind the column, not number 54 on the seating registry, but a founding co-seat on the new Outer Rim Governance Commission, an institution that did not have 53-year-old seating arrangements because it had not existed 53 years ago. She resigned on a Tuesday. She wrote a formal letter that was measured and professional and expressed appropriate gratitude for the opportunity to serve. She delivered it to the council secretary's office in person. The secretary, who had worked at Veyrath Prime for 40 years and had seen dozens of ambassadors come and go, received it with a nod and a polite word. Then Elena went back to her quarters and packed. Pell came to help. She had asked him if he wanted to, and he had said yes. He helped her box up the books and the framed photographs and the small items she had collected over 3 years. Souvenirs, really, from the various species she had met and gotten to know, small pieces of what the station had taught her about how a galaxy full of different kinds of people actually worked. "Where will you go?" Pell asked. "Reach," Elena said, without hesitation. Pell looked at her. "I have heard it is beautiful," he said. "It is," Elena said. She was packing something that was neither a souvenir nor a book. It was the original draft of the plan she had written the night of the first vote, 3 years ago. The pages were slightly crumpled and she had written all over them in the margins since. She folded it and put it in the front of her bag where it would be easy to find. "I have also heard," Pell said carefully, "that it welcomes people of various kinds." Elena looked at him. She thought about the 38 votes. The non-founding species block. The conversations in corridors and conference rooms and quiet communication channels. The promise she had made, and meant, about what a real seat at the table would be used for. "It does," she said. "If you ever," she stopped. She had not planned to say this. She was not sure it was appropriate. But she said it anyway because truth deserved to be spoken, as Pell himself had taught her. "If you ever wanted a different kind of work," she said, "on a planet that's still being built, there would be room." Pell was still for a moment. Then he said in his own language, a phrase Elena recognized. It meant, "That is the first time anyone has asked me that." "I know," Elena said. "I'm sorry it took this long." She finished packing. She left the quarters. She walked down the corridor of Veyrath Prime for the last time, past the chamber with the crystal column, which was already being renovated because the new seating arrangement required a structural change, past the communication relay rooms and the administrative offices and the docking bays with their view of Duran turning orange and gold below. She stepped onto the transport ship. She sat down. The ship disengaged from the station. She watched Veyrath Prime recede through the porthole. The station she had spent 3 years in, fighting for fractions and inches and slow progress in a system that was not built for her. She watched it get smaller. She felt no bitterness about it. She felt something else, the particular clarity that comes from having done something difficult all the way through to completion. Then she turned away from the porthole and looked forward, toward where the ship was going, and she did not look back. 2 years after the Meridian first crossed the Council's boundary, Reach had 412 permanent residents. It had a medical center that served both the permanent population and the survey crews that regularly passed through. It had a school, small, 20 students but real, with 2 teachers and a curriculum that was being designed from scratch because how do you teach children who are growing up on a planet that didn't exist in human history a year ago? You figure it out. You go. It had a market, an actual open-air market on Tuesdays and Fridays, where people traded produce from their gardens, goods they had brought from Earth, and occasionally strange and interesting things that survey crews had found in the outer regions of the rim and brought back to trade. It had a name for its first neighborhood, the River Quarter, because it grew up along the river, and rivers have always been where beginnings happen. Sam stood in the River Quarter on the second anniversary of the Meridian's departure. He was standing in front of the first building, the low stone structure with the large windows, and he was looking at a sign that had just been put up over the door. The sign was made of local wood, carved by hand by a woman named Carmen who had come on the third wave of settlers and turned out to be both an excellent engineer and an exceptional craftsperson. The sign read, Meridian Institute of Outer Rim Sciences. He stared at it for a while. Then he went inside. The main room was full of people doing various kinds of work, at desks, at whiteboards, at equipment stations along the walls. There were 12 researchers on full-time staff, 30 more on rotation, and a network of data-sharing agreements with universities and scientific institutions on Earth and, through the open publication policy that had been in place since the beginning, with 17 other species. Priya was at a large table covered in samples. She looked up. What do you think of the sign? She said. I think Carmen did good work, Sam said. She did, Priya agreed. Come look at this. She waved him over to the table. New soil sample from the southern continent. We found something. What kind of something? Microbial life, Priya said. Her voice was controlled in the way of someone being professional about something that was making them want to shout. Indigenous microbial life. Complex. Not Earth origin contamination. We've run the exclusion test 6 times. Native to reach. Sam looked at the sample. He thought about what that meant. Not just scientifically, though the scientific implications alone were staggering, but what it meant about the planet, about the universe, about the idea that life was not rare, that it found ways, that the galaxy was not a cold, empty place with a handful of civilized exceptions but something alive in ways that went deeper than any council charter could account for. You're going to publish this? He said. Already written, Priya said. She patted a folder on the table. Open access. Same as everything else. The council's biology division is going to want to come out here when they see this. Let them come, Priya said. There's room. The planet is big. Elena arrived on the second anniversary. She came on a commercial transport. There was now commercial transport to reach, 3 ships a week, because the Outer Rim Navigation Accord had made travel through the region fast enough to make commercial routes viable, and she walked off the ship into the spaceport that had been built 6 months ago on the flat ground north of the River Quarter. Yara was there to meet her. The 2 women had not seen each other in person since the negotiations had concluded. They had communicated regularly through various channels, but this was the first time. They stood in the spaceport and looked at each other for a moment. They were not the kind of people who made dramatic gestures. They were the kind of people who did things. Welcome to Reach, Yara said. Thank you, Elena said. It's better than the coordinates suggested. It's better every week, Yara said. They walked together into the River Quarter. Elena looked at everything as she walked. The buildings of local stone, the market stalls on their Tuesday schedule, the school with children visible through the window bent over some kind of project. She looked at the river, which was the same river Sam had stood beside, and thought about his grandmother's words on the first landing. She looked at the Meridian Institute with its new sign. What do you want to do here? Yara asked. Elena thought about it. She had been thinking about it since she resigned. She knew what she was good at. She knew what the work ahead required. The council is going to be sending delegations to Reach, she said. Official visits. To inspect the governance compact implementation, to check on the accord, to do all the things that official delegations do. Someone needs to receive them. Handle the diplomatic end of it. Make sure that Reach is not a curiosity to the galaxy but a participant in it. You want to be Reach's diplomat, Yara said. I want to be Reach's diplomat, Elena said. Not Earth's ambassador to the council. Reach's own voice. Yara thought about this for a moment. The planet doesn't have a formal governance structure yet. We've been managing with a council of first settlers. Then I'd like to be part of building one, Elena said. From scratch. Like the school. Like the curriculum. You figure it out as you go. Yara looked at her. She thought about the Houston office with the fraying carpet and the star map. She thought about the Meridian leaving the hangar on an October morning. She thought about standing on the surface of Reach for the first time and seeing the green in the river and the spreadhand trees. Okay, she said. Let's go figure it out. The ceremony for the first Outer Rim Navigation Accord meeting on Reach was held outdoors, on the banks of the river, on a clear afternoon when the planet's sun was warm and the wind through the vegetation made its particular high-pitched sound. Representatives had come from 9 different species. Not the full council, not yet, but 9. including, notably, a small gray-skinned being with 4 thin arms and large amber eyes who had submitted a formal application to join the River Quarter community 2 months earlier and had arrived on the second-to-last transport. Pell had found that alternative kind of work. He had found it on a planet that was still being built, where there was always something to do and always room for someone who wanted to be somewhere new. He stood at the riverbank with the others in the warm afternoon, and looked at the water and the green and the spread canopies of the trees. Sam was standing not far from him. They were not exactly friends yet, they barely knew each other. But Reach was a small community and everyone at the riverbank was, in the most direct sense of the word, there by choice. Is this what you expected? Pell asked Sam. His language was his own, the one Elena had learned, and Sam had also been studying for 3 months, because Reach's school curriculum included it, and Sam had decided that if the children were learning it, he should too. No, Sam said honestly. I expected to do science. I expected to find Caro points and write papers and go home. And instead, Pell said. Sam looked around at the riverbank, at the people from 9 different species standing together on a planet in the outer rim that had been empty 2 years ago, at the buildings of local stone and the market stalls and the school and the sign above the institute door. Instead this, he said. Yara spoke at the ceremony. She was not a natural public speaker, she was a scientist and a planner and a person who preferred to let data make the argument. But she had agreed to speak, and so she spoke. She told them about the Houston office, the fraying carpet, the star map with the red marker. She told them about Carl Nguyen saying he believed in Earth's potential, and what that belief had amounted to in practice. She told them about the Meridian, the refitted freighter that was now, officially, a historical vessel maintained in the hangar at Reach's spaceport, because Marcus had decreed it was not being scrapped and no one had argued. She told them about the first time they crossed the boundary. We weren't heroes, she said. We weren't chosen for this. We were people who had been told no often enough that the word had stopped meaning what it was supposed to mean. No meant, find another way. And we found another way. She told them about the moment she stood on the planet's surface for the first time. About the word reach. About why she had chosen it. We reach for things, she said. Not because we are certain. Not because the outcome is guaranteed. But because the reaching itself is the point. Because sitting still and waiting for a world that was not built with you in mind to make room for you, that is a kind of slow disappearing. And humans do not disappear. She paused. She looked out at the river and the trees. This place is named for what we did to get here, she said. But I also think it is named for what we intend to keep doing. We are going to keep reaching. For the rest of the outer rim. For every Caro point that hasn't been found yet. For every relationship with every species that has also been sitting at the far end of a very long table. We are going to keep reaching. She paused again. Because that's what we do, she said. HFY. From now on for me. For us. From now on. After the ceremony, as the afternoon turned to evening and the planet's sun moved toward the horizon and lit the river gold, Sam walked to the edge of the water. He stood there the way he had stood on the roof in Denver, just standing, looking, being somewhere. He had a message on his communicator. It was from his sister Rosa. She had been accepted to the second cohort of Reach settlers, starting in 4 months. She was coming. She was going to work in the agricultural program. She had a background in logistics and an understanding of systems that Priya had said would be invaluable for the farming operations currently scaling up on the southern continent. He read the message twice. Then he looked up at the sky. The planet's sun was close to the horizon now, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening eastern sky. Not many yet, but the first ones, the bright ones that came out before the full night arrived. He thought about the roof in Denver. The receiver array he had built from cheap components and stubbornness. The 5 years of data he had collected and organized and carried to a job interview in Houston with a company that had a bad logo and a great purpose. He thought about Yara saying we figure it out as we go. He thought about Elena and her plan, written and rewritten over 3 years in the margins of a crumpled document. He thought about Marcus with his 3 sets of tests for every system. About Lena flying with one leg tucked under her and a cold drink in the holder. About Priya pressing her hands flat on the table to keep them steady when the data was bigger than she expected. He thought about the 12 Caro points drawn in red on a star map on a wall, and the planet in the middle of the arc and the word written in the circle. Reach. He thought about all the people who had said no. He thought, look at where no got us. He looked at the first stars appearing in the Reach sky, a sky he was still learning, still mapping, still discovering, and he felt, very simply and very completely, the feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because someone had put him there. Because he had gotten there himself. 3 years after the Meridian returned from its first mission, the Outer Rim Navigation Accord had 51 signatories. The 3 non-signing species were in ongoing negotiation. The Caro Point network was in active use. Traffic through the Outer Rim had increased by a factor of 8 in 18 months. Reach had 1,000 permanent residents. The microbial life Priya had discovered had turned out to be the first chapter of a much longer scientific story. The planet's biosphere was more complex than initial surveys had indicated, and the research implications would take decades to fully explore. Priya was happy about this in the specific way that scientists are happy when a question turns out to be deeper than expected. The council still met on Vairath Prime. The crystal column in the main chamber had been removed during the renovation. The seat that had been partially behind it was now occupied by a new Earth ambassador, a man named Dr. Thomas Lee, who had been Elena's deputy and who had inherited her habit of learning the names of everyone on the station's staff. On the last day of the third year, Yara Singh sat on the steps of the Meridian Institute in the evening light and wrote in a new notebook, not the red marker star map, not the data logs, just a plain notebook for thinking on paper. She wrote about what the next 10 years should look like. What else was out there? What questions hadn't been asked yet? She wrote, "The outer rim is not a destination. It is a beginning. Every beginning is an invitation to keep going. We are humans. We keep going." She closed the notebook. The river made its particular sound below the institute, between a rush and a hum, the sound that Sam had noticed on the first day and that now, for all of them, was the sound of this place, of this particular home that they had found by going where nobody had told them to go. The stars came out over Reach. The planet turned. The universe, which had been organized for 600 years by the same people making the same decisions in the same chamber, was not what it had been. It was better. Because someone had refused to accept the seat behind the column. Because someone had written Caro, already on it, already going, already finding the way, and meant it with everything they had. The end.